Beloved, as we step into 2026, it's time to let go of the fear, the hesitation, and the what ifs that have held you back. This year, God is calling you to move forward, not by your own understanding, but by trusting Him with every step. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when the path ahead seems unclear. But the same God who has brought you through yesterday's storms is the God who will guide your tomorrow. Today, I want you to hear this. The future belongs to those who trust God enough to follow Him, even when they can't see the whole picture. Let Him lead you forward and watch Him turn your faith into a journey of breakthrough, purpose, and unexpected favor. Trusting God requires surrender to His plan, and surrender is not always easy. Many of us want control over every detail of our lives, every step of the journey, and every outcome. We make our plans, map our goals, and set our timelines. But the truth is, our vision is limited, and God's perspective is infinite. When we try to take the reins and force our own way, we often end up frustrated, confused, or stuck in cycles that keep us from moving forward. Surrender is an acknowledgement that God is not only capable, but willing to lead us through every challenge, every opportunity, and every unknown territory. It is a deliberate choice to release our grip on what we think should happen and to trust that God knows what needs to happen. This doesn't mean we stop working or striving. It means that our efforts are aligned with His guidance rather than our own impulses. To surrender is to say, Lord, I don't have all the answers, but I know You do. I may not understand the timing, the path, or the methods, but I will follow where You lead. Trusting God through surrender also means embracing humility. It is a recognition that we are not the ultimate authors of our destiny and that our human wisdom is finite. When we surrender, we allow God to correct our direction, adjust our priorities, and even reshape our desires to match His will. This process can be uncomfortable because it challenges our pride and the need to feel in control. But it is in surrender that true freedom begins. Freedom from anxiety, fear, and the weight of trying to force things into place on our own. When we release the need to dictate every step, we open ourselves up to receive God's peace, guidance, and provision in ways that we could not imagine. Surrendering to God's plan also cultivates faith. Every time we take a step of obedience without fully knowing the outcome, we are training our hearts to trust Him more deeply. It is in the moments of uncertainty that our faith muscles grow stronger. Trust and surrender are intertwined. One cannot fully exist without the other. The moment we try to trust God while holding tightly to our own ideas, we create tension that can hinder progress. But when we completely surrender, we are able to experience a flow of life that moves according to God's perfect timing and wisdom. Another essential aspect of surrender is patience. Surrender doesn't mean instant answers or immediate results. It means allowing God to work in His perfect timing, even when we feel ready for the breakthrough now. Patience, guided by trust, helps us endure seasons of waiting without frustration, bitterness, or doubt. It is an active posture of faith, not passive resignation. Finally, surrendering to God's plan is a declaration of hope. It is saying that despite the unknowns, despite the challenges, we believe that God's plan for our lives is good. Trusting Him is an act of courage because it requires stepping into the unseen with confidence that God is already there, preparing the way and orchestrating every detail for our ultimate good. Faith over fear is not just a concept. It is a lifestyle, a daily decision to believe in God's promises even when circumstances seem impossible. Fear has a way of whispering lies, making us doubt our worth, question our calling, and even pause when God is asking us to move. It tells us, you're not ready, or it's too risky, or you'll fail, but faith speaks louder than fear. Faith says God is able and he has already gone before me. When we choose faith over fear, we step into the unseen with confidence, trusting that God is orchestrating every detail, even when we cannot see the full picture. Fear keeps us in comfort zones, repeating patterns that feel safe but limit our growth. Faith pushes us into God's next season, which often requires bold steps, courageous decisions, and leaving behind what is familiar. Faith does not deny the reality of challenges, but it refuses to be paralyzed by them. It's the choice to move forward while fear is still knocking on the door of our hearts. In 2026, your next season may feel intimidating, but the path to your purpose is paved with faith, not fear. Choosing faith over fear also reshapes our mindset. It shifts our perspective from scarcity to abundance, from doubt to belief, from I can't to God can. Faith rewires the way we see setbacks, turning obstacles into opportunities for growth and lessons in trust. Fear, on the other hand, magnifies problems, clouds judgment, and steals peace. Every time we respond to God with faith instead of fear, we are activating divine possibilities that would otherwise remain dormant. Faith requires action. It is not passive. It demands movement. Abraham had faith when he left his home without knowing the destination. Moses had faith when he led a people through the wilderness. Esther had faith when she stepped into a palace to save her people. Faith over fear is the same principle. It calls us to step forward even when the outcome is uncertain because we know God is guiding our steps. Faith also strengthens our spiritual resilience. Life will always present challenges and fear will always try to sway us, but faith anchors us in God's truth. When fear arises, it is faith that reminds us of God's past faithfulness, his promises, and his power to overcome every situation. Fear may try to stop you, but faith will carry you. Choosing faith over fear requires perseverance. It is not a one-time declaration, but a daily practice. Each day presents opportunities to trust God in the small and the big, in the seen and the unseen. Faith grows stronger each time we take a step of obedience despite the fears in our hearts. Finally, faith over fear invites God to move in ways we cannot manufacture on our own. Fear keeps us confined to our own understanding, but faith opens the door to miracles, breakthroughs, and divine favor. It is faith that unlocks doors, releases provision, and guides us into the fullness of the season God has prepared. When we choose faith over fear, we align ourselves with God's power, allowing him to lead us forward, transform our lives, and fulfill his purpose in ways that far exceed anything fear could ever hold us back from. Letting go of past setbacks is one of the most powerful acts of faith you can perform as you step into your next season. Every disappointment, every failure, every closed door has the potential to either weigh you down or prepare you for what is ahead. The truth is, holding on to past pain, regrets, or mistakes keeps you trapped in a cycle that prevents you from moving forward. God doesn't intend for you to stay bound by what has already happened. He intends for you to rise above it, to learn from it, and to let it shape your resilience rather than your identity. Letting go is not forgetting or pretending the hurt never existed. It is acknowledging the past, learning from it, and choosing not to allow it to dictate your future. Often, we cling to what was familiar, even if it caused us pain, because change feels uncertain. But God is calling you to release the weight of yesterday, to unburden your heart from the disappointment, and to step into the freedom of today. Your past setbacks do not define your potential. They are stepping stones that refine your character and prepare you for the promises ahead. There is power in surrendering your history to God. When you release it, you make space for new opportunities, divine encounters, and unshakable faith. Carrying the baggage of past failures only limits what God can do in your life. Letting go also requires forgiveness, sometimes of others, sometimes of ourselves. When we harbor resentment or regret, it becomes a chain that keeps us anchored to pain. Forgiveness is not excusing what happened, it is liberating your spirit so that you can fully embrace the future God has planned. Think about the Israelites wandering in the desert. They could not enter the promised land until they let go of the patterns, fears, and disobedience that held them back. Likewise, your forward movement in 2026 requires a conscious choice to release what no longer serves your purpose. Letting go is an act of courage. It demands faith that God's plans are greater than your past, that His vision for your life outweighs every setback you've endured. It requires trusting that He can redeem every mistake, every missed opportunity, and every heartbreak, transforming them into lessons, strength, and preparation for your destiny. The process may be uncomfortable. It may stir up emotions you've long buried or challenge the narratives you've believed about yourself. But every tear shed in surrender is a step toward freedom. Every act of trust over past pain is a declaration that your future is bigger than your history. Letting go also allows you to embrace hope. When the weight of setbacks is lifted, your eyes are open to possibilities you could not see before. You can dream bigger, act bolder, and step into opportunities with confidence. Knowing that God is guiding your path. Remember, God specializes in turning brokenness into beauty, failure into foundation, and disappointment into destiny. By releasing past setbacks, you make room for His transformative power to work in your life. Your future is waiting, but it cannot be fully embraced while your hands are clenched tightly around what is behind you. Freedom comes in the moment you choose to trust God with what was, what is, and what will be. Each setback, each trial, each closed door has a purpose. But that purpose is fully realized only when you surrender it to God and step forward in obedience. Obedience is the bridge between where you are and where God wants you to go. So often, we wait for clarity, waiting for the perfect moment or for everything to line up before taking a step, but God's direction is activated through obedience, not just understanding. Obedience requires listening, trusting, and acting even when the path seems unclear. It is saying yes to God's voice when it challenges your comfort, your plans, or even your pride. Every time you choose obedience over hesitation, you invite God's guidance into your life in a real and tangible way. Obedience is not just about following rules or doing what is easy to see. It's about aligning your heart with God's will, even when it requires sacrifice or courage. The Bible is full of examples where obedience opened doors to blessings and breakthroughs. Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave his home without knowing the destination, and his obedience led to a legacy of faith and promise. Noah obeyed when God instructed him to build an ark in the middle of dry land, and his obedience saved a generation. Each story reminds us that divine direction comes to those who respond with trust and action, even before full understanding. In our own lives, obedience may look like small decisions, speaking truth in love, extending forgiveness, making a sacrifice for someone else, stepping into a calling that feels daunting. It's not always dramatic, but it is always powerful because it positions you to receive God's guidance. Obedience requires humility because it acknowledges that God knows more than we do. It asks us to put aside our agendas, our timing, and even our fears, and say, Lord, I will follow your instructions, even when I don't see the full plan. When we obey, we align ourselves with God's purposes, and suddenly, what seemed confusing or impossible begins to make sense. God's direction becomes clearer because obedience tunes our hearts to his frequency. Another essential part of obedience is consistency. It is not a one-time decision, but a daily posture of aligning our thoughts, words, and actions with God's will. Every act of obedience, no matter how small, compounds over time, creating momentum that propels us into the next season. It is like a ripple effect. One decision to obey can open doors not only for you, but for generations to come. Obedience also builds trust. The more we obey God, the more we experience his faithfulness. And the more confident we become in following him into the unknown. Fear loses its grip because we've walked with God before, and we know he will lead us again. There will be moments when obedience feels inconvenient, challenging, or even risky, but it is precisely in those moments that God's direction is most evident. He often calls us to move in ways that stretch our faith, requiring us to trust him beyond our understanding. Obedience is the key that unlocks divine timing, provision, and favor. It positions us in the right place at the right time, guided by a God whose plans are higher, better, and more perfect than anything we could imagine. Without obedience, even the clearest vision can remain out of reach. But when we act on what God is asking of us, he moves to guide, protect, and provide in ways that surpass human logic. Obedience turns potential into purpose, uncertainty into clarity, and hesitation into momentum. It is the pathway through which God leads us forward, shaping our destiny as we yield to his direction and preparing us for the blessings he has promised. Patience is not passive waiting. It is an active, intentional trust in God's perfect timing. So often we feel like we have to rush, like we are running out of time, or like doors must open immediately for us to succeed. But God operates on a schedule that is far higher than ours, and his timing is always designed for our good, not our discomfort. Patience is the posture of the heart that allows us to remain steadfast even when the results are not immediate. It requires faith that the delays, the waiting periods, and even the closed doors are not signs of God's absence, but part of the preparation process for what is ahead. Many of us have tried to shortcut the process, pushing forward in our own strength, only to discover that rushing creates stress, mistakes, and missed opportunities. Patience teaches us to trust the process, to align ourselves with God's plan, and to embrace the journey rather than just the destination. It is in the waiting seasons that God molds our character, develops resilience, and strengthens our faith. Abraham waited decades for the promise of Isaac. Joseph endured years of imprisonment and betrayal before God elevated him to save nations. David waited patiently before ascending the throne. Each of these stories shows that the waiting period is not wasted, it is formative. Patience also requires surrender. It is a recognition that God is in control, that he sees the beginning, the middle, and the end, and that his plans cannot be rushed. When we surrender to his timing, we free ourselves from anxiety, frustration, and the temptation to take matters into our own hands. Patience allows us to maintain peace in the midst of uncertainty, to walk faithfully when the path ahead is not yet visible. It also teaches discernment. Waiting provides space to hear God more clearly, to understand his direction, and to make decisions that align with his will. In the rush of life, it is easy to make choices based on fear, pressure, or impatience. But patience creates clarity and alignment with divine purpose. Practicing patience does not mean doing nothing. It means preparing, growing, praying, and positioning ourselves while trusting God to open doors at the right moment. It is active waiting that keeps us moving spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, even when circumstances seem stagnant. Patience is also a test of faith. When we feel the temptation to give up, to complain, or to move ahead prematurely, it is our ability to wait on God that proves our trust in Him. Each season of waiting is an invitation to deepen our reliance on His promises and to strengthen our confidence that He is faithful. In 2026, patience will be a key element in stepping into your next season. There may be opportunities that seem delayed, prayers that appear unanswered, or doors that remain closed, but every moment of waiting has a purpose. God is orchestrating events, people, and circumstances in your favor, even if you cannot yet see the complete picture. Patience allows you to walk forward without desperation, to remain steadfast without wavering, and to trust without doubt. It positions you to receive God's best rather than settling for less because of frustration or impatience. Remember, God's timing is perfect and His plans for you are always worth the wait. Patience is not just a virtue, it is a strategy for walking in alignment with God, embracing His timing, and stepping confidently into the season He has prepared. God's guidance is not always loud or immediate. Often it comes quietly through moments of prayer, reflection, and stillness. In the rush of life, it's easy to make decisions based on emotions, opinions, or convenience rather than divine wisdom. But when we take intentional time to seek God, to listen, and to reflect on His word, we open the door for clarity and direction that surpasses human understanding. Prayer is the key that connects our hearts to God's heart. It is through prayer that we align our desires, our thoughts, and our actions with His will. It is in those moments of honest conversation with God that we hear His voice, sense His leading, and feel the peace that comes from knowing we are not walking alone. Reflection complements prayer because it allows us to process our experiences, recognize patterns, and discern God's lessons in our lives. Reflection is intentional thinking, considering how God has already moved and identifying where He may be calling us next. Without reflection, we risk repeating mistakes, missing opportunities, or ignoring the subtle nudges God places on our hearts. Together, prayer and reflection create a rhythm of communication and understanding with God. It is a dynamic where we speak, listen, and respond. Often, guidance comes not through grand visions, but through small, consistent confirmations, a scripture that resonates, a prompting in your spirit, or a circumstance that opens a door and closes another. God's guidance requires attentiveness. It asks us to be present, to quiet the noise of the world, and to prioritize our spiritual connection over our distractions. It is in this space that we can discern the difference between our own desires and God's will. Prayer without reflection can become routine or empty, and reflection without prayer can be shallow or misguided. But when combined, they create a powerful channel through which God can direct your steps, correct your course, and give you insight for the next season. In 2026, God's guidance will be crucial as you navigate new opportunities, challenges, and responsibilities. Trusting in your own understanding is tempting, but it will never replace the wisdom and perspective that comes from God. He sees the beginning and the end, and He knows the paths that will lead to blessing and fulfillment. Prayer and reflection allow you to tap into that divine insight and make decisions rooted in faith rather than fear. Another important aspect of seeking guidance is obedience to what God reveals. Sometimes God speaks through prayer and reflection, nudging us to act in a certain way, reach out to someone, or take a step that seems risky. Acting on these confirmations is where faith meets action. Waiting passively without following God's prompting can lead to missed opportunities, but responding with courage aligns your life with His purpose. God's guidance also cultivates peace. When you pray and reflect, decisions become clearer, doubts diminish, and a sense of calm assurance fills your spirit. You no longer feel like you are walking blindly because you have intentionally sought God's direction and chosen to trust it. The more you practice prayer and reflection, the more attuned your spirit becomes to God's leading. It becomes natural to recognize His voice, discern His will, and respond with confidence. Finally, remember that guidance through prayer and reflection is not a one-time act, but a lifelong practice. Every season of life, every major decision, and every transition requires continual communion with God. The habit of seeking Him first ensures that you are not guided by the world, by fear, or by your limited perspective, but by the infinite wisdom and love of the one who knows your destiny and desires your good. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward in faith despite it. So often, we wait for perfect clarity, waiting until the path is fully illuminated or until every detail is in place. But God rarely calls us to wait until everything feels safe or certain. He calls us to take bold steps, trusting that His presence will light the way, even when the journey seems unclear. Courage is essential for stepping into the new season God has prepared for you in 2026. It requires a heart that is willing to risk, to trust, and to act on the promises of God, even when the outcome is unseen. When we act with courage, we are acknowledging that God's plans are bigger than our fears and that His power is greater than our doubts. Courage is stepping out while fear is still whispering, "You might fail," or "You might be rejected." It is choosing to move forward because faith is louder than fear. Often, the greatest breakthroughs come after the boldest steps. The Israelites had to cross the Red Sea without knowing how it would part. David faced Goliath with only a sling and faith in God. Esther entered the king's palace, risking her life because she trusted that God had positioned her for such a time as this. In each case, courage was the vehicle through which God delivered His promises. Courage is also built through practice. Each time we act in faith despite uncertainty, we strengthen our spiritual resilience. Every courageous step teaches us to rely on God, to trust His timing, and to hear His voice more clearly. Over time, courage becomes not just a reaction to fear, but a lifestyle and ongoing commitment to follow God's leading regardless of circumstances. It is important to understand that courage does not mean we won't feel fear, doubt, or hesitation. Feeling fear is natural. What matters is that we act in obedience despite it. Courage requires discipline, prayer, and reliance on God's strength rather than our own. It calls us to align our hearts with God's promises and to trust in that He will guide, protect, and provide as we move forward. Courage also inspires others. When we step boldly into God's calling, we become a beacon of hope for those around us. Our willingness to act despite uncertainty encourages others to trust God, take steps of faith, and pursue their own destinies. In 2026, courage will be the key that unlocks doors and opportunities that fear alone would keep closed. The path may be unclear, but God's guidance is always present. Acting with courage demonstrates trust in His plan, obedience to His calling, and readiness to receive his blessings. Courage requires humility as well. It is acknowledging that we cannot control every outcome and that our success depends on God's power, not solely on our abilities. By surrendering control, we make space for divine intervention, favor, and provision. Finally, courage is the momentum that carries us forward when the road is uncertain. It transforms fear into faith, hesitation into action, and doubt into confidence. Every step taken with courage positions us for breakthrough, aligns us with God's purpose, and opens the door to experiences and blessings that could not have been accessed otherwise. Courage is the heartbeat of progress, the fuel for faith and action, and the bridge that carries us from where we are to where God has destined us to be.